Welcome to the Curious Voyager. It's lovely to have you here tonight, wherever you are. I want to tell you something strange before we even begin, and I'll say it softly because there's no rush at all. That machine, the big white tunnel you may have been slid into once, the one that clanged and knocked around you while you lay very still and tried not to think about it. That machine never actually looked at you. Not once. There's no camera in there, no lens pointed at your body, no film, no light, no little shutter clicking away in the dark. It never took your picture the way a camera would. What it did was quieter and far stranger than that. It reached into your body, found the atoms inside you, and made them hum. And then it went silent, and it listened. It wrote down the tiny echo each one of them sang back. And from those echoes, from something almost like sound, it built the picture that a doctor later read. You weren't photographed. You were played, gently, like an instrument. And tonight, slowly, we're going to understand exactly how. So settle in. Get comfortable, however you like to be. If you're lying in bed with the blanket pulled up, good. If there's a lamp still on somewhere across the room, let it stay on. If you're on a couch, or a train, or somewhere far from home, that's good too. And before we drift any deeper, if you enjoy these slow journeys and you'd like more of them, a quiet like and subscribe really does help this sleepy little channel keep going. Small creators like me lean on that more than you'd think. And to those of you already here, already part of the voyage, thank you. Truly, tell me, if you feel like it, where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it in your corner of the dark? I always love to imagine you out there. Now, here's my one promise to you. I'm going to take this slowly. There's no need to hold on to every word. There's no test at the end, no part you have to catch. If your eyes close before we're finished, that's perfectly all right. The ideas will still be here, waiting, when you wake. In fact, that's rather the point. I'll try not to make any of this so interesting that it keeps you awake. But if it does, well, at least you'll have learnt something about the machine that once looked inside your own head. A fair trade, I think. So let's begin, shall we? Let's start with you. With your own body, lying there right now. You are, it turns out, mostly water. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of you is water. It's in your blood, in your muscles, in your soft tissues, tucked into every corner of you, and water, as you may half remember from somewhere long ago, is made of hydrogen and oxygen. That hydrogen is what matters here. Because hydrogen is the simplest atom there is, just a single tiny particle called a proton at its heart, and your body is absolutely full of it. Trillions upon uncountable trillions of these little hydrogen protons, riding along in all that water. And it's these, and really only these, that an MRI cares about. It doesn't see your skin, or your bones, or your thoughts. It listens for the hydrogen in your water. That's the whole secret hiding in the middle of the machine. Now here's the lovely part. Each one of those hydrogen protons has a strange little property that physicists call spin. You don't need to picture it perfectly. Just imagine each proton as a minuscule spinning charge, and because it's a spinning charge, it behaves like a tiny, tiny bar magnet. A microscopic compass needle, smaller than anything you could ever see. And normally, inside you, these countless little magnets all point in completely random directions. Every which way. One tilts north, its neighbour tilts sideways, the next one points down, and so on, all jumbled up. And because they're all pointing everywhere at once, they cancel each other out. As a crowd, they add up to nothing in particular. Your body doesn't feel magnetic. You could hold a compass to your arm right now, and nothing would happen. All that hidden magnetism is there, but it's scattered, pointing nowhere together. And that's exactly the situation the memory machine wants to change. So you slide into the tunnel, the bore, it's called, that narrow opening at the center, and inside that tunnel is a magnet, not a fridge magnet, an enormous one, a magnet so powerful it's almost hard to describe, and we'll come to just how staggeringly strong it is a little later. For now, all you need to feel is this. The moment your body enters that field, the physicists call this steady, always present magnetic field B0 or B0, the great background field the whole machine is built around. The moment you're inside it, all those scattered little proton magnets suddenly have a direction to answer to. And so they turn. They line up. Most of them settle pointing along the field, like a whole field of tiny compass needles, finally agreeing on where north is. Where a moment ago there was random chaos, now there's a faint, quiet order running through your body. You wouldn't feel a thing. But it's happening, all through you, the instant you lie down. But they don't just lie there, pointing straight and still. And this is a detail I love, so let's slow right down for it. Each of those protons, lined up in the field, also wobbles. It spins, and as it spins, it traces a little circle, tilting round and round, exactly the way a spinning top wobbles as it turns, drawing slow circles with its axis while it whirls. Have you ever watched a spinning top just before it settles, the way its whole body leans and sweeps around in a lazy cone? That's it. That's what every hydrogen proton in you is doing inside the magnet. Physicists have a name for that wobble. They call it precession. And the rate of that wobble, how many times a second each little top sweeps around, has its own special name too. The Larmor frequency. And here's where it becomes almost beautiful. That wobble rate isn't random. It depends, very precisely, on how strong the magnet is. The stronger the field, the faster they wobble in a fixed and exact relationship, about 42.58 million wobbles a second for every unit of magnetic strength, every Tesla, as they measure it. So inside a common hospital scanner, the protons in your body are precessing at around 64 million times a second. And that number, 64 million cycles a second, 64 megahertz, that's a radio frequency. That's right in the neighborhood of the FM radio stations you'd find in your car. Which means, in a very real sense, the hydrogen in your body is tuned right now to a radio note. It's ready to answer, but only to a signal at exactly its own frequency. And that is the key that unlocks the whole machine. Resonance. Let me give you the gentlest picture for it. Think of a child on a swing. If you want to send that swing higher, you don't just shove at it whenever. You push at exactly the right moment, in time with its natural rhythm, a little push each time it swings back to you, and those small, perfectly timed pushes add up, and the swing goes higher and higher. But push at the wrong rhythm, out of time, and nothing happens. The swing just judders and stalls. That's resonance. Energy only passes across when the rhythm matches perfectly. The memory does exactly this to your protons. Once they're all lined up and wobbling at their Larmor frequency, the machine sends in a pulse, a burst of radio waves tuned to precisely that same frequency. They call it the ARF pulse, the radio frequency pulse. And because it's tuned to exactly the rhythm the protons are already keeping, they absorb it. They can't help it. Like the swing catching each well-timed push, the protons take in that energy and are tipped, knocked out of their neat alignment, pushed over onto their sides, all of them nudged together into a new, tilted, momentary dance. Everything else in your body, every other kind of atom, ignores the pulse completely, because it isn't tuned to them. Only the hydrogen answers. Only the thing at the matching frequency responds. This tipping over is what they call excitation. The protons, briefly, are excited, lifted up out of their rest. And then, and this is the part I want you to carry, as you drift off, the machine stops. The pulse switches off. And in the sudden quiet, those tipped protons begin to fall back. They relax, slowly returning to their alignment with the great field, settling back the way they were. The way a swing coasts down when you stop pushing it. But as they settle, they have to give back the energy they just borrowed. And they give it back the only way they can, by singing it out as a faint radio signal of their own. A tiny, tiny echo, whispered back into the machine by the hydrogen atoms in your own water. That is the whisper the MRI has been waiting for. It goes quiet, and it leans in. And with a delicate receiver coil, it catches that faint returning note, the echo of your own atoms settling back down to rest. No light was ever involved. No lens. No picture, in the way you'd normally mean the word. Just a field that lined them up, a single perfectly tuned note that stirred them, and then the soft radio echo they sang as they relaxed. The whole image, everything the doctor will eventually read, is built out of those echoes, out of something far more like sound than sight. And already you can feel the strangeness of it settling in. You lie perfectly still, and yet inside you something is happening, a whole silent field of tiny tops, tipping and settling, humming back their answer. But how, you might be wondering, does the machine know which whisper came from where inside you? How does it tell your knee from your shoulder, one sliver of your brain from the next, when the whole body is singing at once? That is a beautiful question to fall asleep to. And the answer, when you hear it, is one of those pieces of engineering so clever it feels slightly unfair that it works at all. But we will get to the how of locating those whispers in a moment. First, there is something else you should know about the machine you are lying inside, something about its heart, which is nothing like a camera at all, and in some ways nothing like anything else in the hospital around it. The magnet in a clinical MRI scanner is not like a magnet you would picture. It is not a horseshoe on a shelf or a bar of magnetized steel. It is a great coiled ring of wire, niobium-titanium to be precise, wound into loops and folded back on itself inside a casing you cannot really see because it is buried under layers of shielding and insulation. And through that wire, a current flows. It has been flowing since the magnet was first switched on and charged, ramped up. In the engineer's phrase, and it will keep flowing without any additional power for as long as the magnet exists in its current state. Possibly years. Possibly longer. The current does not decay. It does not slow down. It does not need the hospital's power grid to keep it alive. If the power went out tonight, all across the building, the scanner room would go dark, and the ventilation would stop, and the staff would reach for torches, and the magnet would keep humming. The field would remain exactly as strong as it ever was, completely untouched by the blackout. This is what superconductivity makes possible. At ordinary temperatures, wire resists the flow of electricity. Some energy is always lost to heat, a little friction in the world at the atomic level, and so a current without any source gradually dies away. But niobium-titanium, cooled far enough, loses all of that resistance. Every last trace of it, not approximately, but genuinely, completely, the electrons move without impedance, without any friction at all. And so the current has nowhere to go and nothing to slow it down, and it simply keeps circling. Forever is a long word, but in practical terms, the word fits. The condition required for this, the temperature that strips resistance entirely from the metal, is extraordinary. The coils of the magnet must be kept at around 4 Kelvin. 4, not 400, not 40. 4 Kelvin above absolute zero. In the units you might be more familiar with, that is roughly minus 269 degrees Celsius, or about minus 452 degrees Fahrenheit. Absolute zero, the theoretical floor of temperature itself, the point where all thermal motion ceases, is at 0 Kelvin. The magnet runs 4 degrees above that. To put it another way, deep space, far from any star, sits at around 2.7 Kelvin. The inside of the magnet is colder than that. Inside a warm hospital, inside a building where the staff are making tea and the heating is running and patients are lying under blankets, there is a ring of metal a few degrees colder than open interstellar space. The thing that holds it there is liquid helium, roughly 1,000 to 2,000 litres of it, depending on the scanner design, stored in a vacuum-jacketed vessel called a cryostat wrapped around the magnet coils, a sophisticated thermos flask on a scale that takes a lorry to deliver. Helium, unlike every other element, remains liquid all the way down to these temperatures at normal pressure, which is one of the stranger facts about it and the reason nothing else will do. The liquid sits around the coils and keeps them at that 4 Kelvin threshold, and as long as it does, the superconductivity holds, the resistance stays at 0, and the field stays on. The field itself is described in units called Tesla, named after the Serbian-American inventor Nikola Tesla. A clinical scanner is typically 1.5 Tesla, or 3 Tesla. Those numbers can be hard to feel the weight of, so here is one way to feel it. The magnetic field of the Earth, the field that makes a compass needle swing north, is about 50 microtesla. 1 Tesla is 1,000,000 microtesla. A 3 Tesla scanner generates a field roughly 60,000 times stronger than the planet you are lying on. If you held a compass inside the bore of a 3 Tesla machine, it would not point north. It would point toward the magnet and stay there, shaking. Researchers have pushed further. Scanners running at 7 Tesla exist for specialized imaging and research. There are a small number at 9.4 and 10.5 Tesla. And in Saclay, France, a research project called ISULT has built a magnet capable of 11.7 Tesla, the strongest human-capable Muri magnet in the world at the time of its first tests. It fills a room. It is, by measures of magnetic field strength, among the most powerful objects humans have ever built for any medical or scientific purpose. And yet the physics it relies on, the precessing proton and the tuned radio note, is exactly the same as the scanner at your local hospital, just turned up. Now, what happens when something goes wrong with the cold? There is a word for it in the engineering world, short and plain and slightly ominous: a quench. A quench is what happens when the superconductivity breaks down, when the temperature in the coils creeps up, for any reason, past the threshold, and suddenly the wire remembers it has resistance. The current, which had been circulating without opposition, meets friction, and friction means heat. And heat makes the wire warmer still, and that melts more of the superconductivity, and within seconds the whole magnet has reverted to ordinary resistive wire, with an enormous current flowing through it, and the energy has to go somewhere, and so it goes into the liquid helium all around it. The helium boils. 1 liter of liquid helium, when it boils, expands to roughly 750 liters of cold gas. The cryostat holds over 1,000 liters of the liquid. You can do the arithmetic, and it is not a comfortable number. The gas has to go somewhere quickly, because 1,000 liters of cryogenic helium expanding in a sealed room would displace the oxygen, and the result for anyone inside would be swift and serious. So every memory room is built with a quench pipe, a dedicated duct running from the magnet, housing up through the building and out through the roof, so that if a quench occurs, the helium vents safely outside. There are oxygen monitors in the scanner room, watching constantly. The protocol for a quench is to get anyone inside the room out immediately and let the gas vent. The magnet itself, if it quenches uncontrolled, typically needs to be completely recharged afterward. Weeks of work, a complex and expensive process. And the helium that boiled away has to be replaced, and replacing it is not as simple as it once was. Helium is a finite element. Unlike most gases, it is light enough that once it escapes the atmosphere it drifts away into space and is, for practical purposes, gone. Almost all the helium we use comes from deep underground, extracted as a byproduct when natural gas fields are drilled. There is no good way to make more of it. Global helium supplies have tightened significantly over the last decade. There were notable shortages in 2018 and 2019, and again in 2022. And at those times, hospitals and research centers around the world found themselves worried about whether they could keep their scanners running. Because without helium there is no superconductivity, and without superconductivity the magnet quenches, and without the magnet there is no MRI. A scanner that cannot be kept cold is a scanner that cannot work. The industry has responded. Newer magnet designs are moving towards sealed systems, so-called zero boil-off or near-zero boil-off designs, that require far less helium to maintain. Some newer systems run on as little as a single liter of liquid helium rather than the thousands of liters older designs needed, held at temperature by a mechanical cryocooler that cycles like a refrigerator rather than relying purely on a vast reservoir of liquid. It is a quiet but significant revolution in how these machines are kept alive, driven partly by physics and partly by the realization that a gas that floats off into space is not something any supply chain can count on indefinitely. So there it sits, the magnet, always on, colder than space, drawing no power, sustaining a field 60,000 times stronger than the Earth's, wrapped in the last cold reserves of an element lighter than everything. And inside its bore, quite still, is a warm human body. Your body, perhaps in some half-remembered scan, or someone you know lying there in the tunnel noise and the strange still cold. The field reaches through you silently. You feel nothing. The protons in your water, billions upon billions of them, are spinning and precessing in alignment, waiting, and the machine is just beginning to work. But here is what you have not been told yet. Even with all of those protons humming in perfect alignment, even with the field holding them steady, the scanner still has no idea where any of them are. It knows they exist, it knows they are precessing, it knows the frequency at which they hum. But it cannot tell whether a given whisper came from your knee or your hip, from one fold of your brain or the next. The whole body is singing, more or less at once, and without some way of telling one singer from another, you would have not a picture, but a single, undifferentiated murmur. The answer to this, the piece of the puzzle that turns a faint radio echo into a precise map of tissue, is clever enough to feel like a kind of trick. And it involves the noise. The famous, legendary, slightly terrifying noise that fills the bore and rattles through you, and that almost everyone who has ever had a scan remembers long after. The answer, it turns out, is gradient coils. There are 3 sets of them, nested inside the bore around the main magnet, one for each dimension of space, one for left and right, one for front and back, one for head to toe. They are large copper coils, wound carefully, and by themselves they are completely unremarkable. But what they do when current runs through them is quietly extraordinary. They warp the main magnetic field, not dramatically, not randomly, just slightly, and in a controlled, precisely engineered way. They introduce a gentle slope into the field, a gradient, so that the field is fractionally stronger at one end of your body than the other, fractionally stronger on one side than the opposite. And because the Larmor frequency, that spinning rate, that humming pitch of the protons, depends directly on field strength, this slope means that protons in different locations precess at slightly different frequencies. Not the same note, but a spread of notes, each one belonging to a different slice, a different column, a different point in space. Think of it a little like tuning forks laid out in a row. Each one is slightly different. Strike them all at once, and if you listen carefully, you can hear each individual pitch, and you can know exactly where in the row it came from. The gradient coils do something similar to the hydrogen in your body. They give each location its own subtle signature frequency, and by listening to the whole spread of frequencies at once, the machine can sort out which echo came from which slice, which column, which tiny point in the 3-dimensional space of you. Slice select gradient, frequency encode gradient, phase encode gradient. 3 dimensions, 3 slopes, 3 ways of tagging exactly where each faint whisper originated. It is, when you sit with it, a beautiful piece of spatial reasoning, turning an undifferentiated chorus into a precisely labelled map, just by controlling which note each singer is allowed to use. And here is where the noise comes in. Because switching large electrical currents through those coils rapidly, thousands of times per second, on and off and on and off, in whatever pattern the pulse sequence demands, inside a magnetic field of enormous strength, produces a force. A physical, mechanical force. In physics it is called the Lorentz force, after the Dutch physicist Hendrik Lorentz, who described the way a magnetic field pushes on a moving charge. When current flows through the gradient coils inside the main field, those coils are shoved, they flex, they vibrate, they knock against their mountings. And they do this thousands of times a second, fast enough and hard enough to generate sound. Real airborne sound that travels through the housing and into the bore and into the body lying inside it. That is the banging. Not the main magnet. The main magnet makes no sound at all. It is a superconducting loop of circulating current with nothing switching and nothing moving, and it sits in its liquid helium bath in absolute mechanical silence. Every knocking, every clunking, every rapid percussive hammering you have ever heard from an MRI scanner is the gradient coils physically flexing against Lorentz forces, on and off, as fast as the pulse sequence requires. It is, in a real and not entirely metaphorical sense, a very large, very cold, very strange percussive instrument. And it plays at something between 110 and 120 decibels, comparable to a rock concert or a jackhammer working a few feet away, which is why hearing protection, earplugs, or padded headphones is given to every patient before they go in. Different pulse sequences make different patterns of switching, and so different pulse sequences produce different sounds. If you have had more than one MRI scan and you remember different rhythms, different pitches, a rapid-fire repetition here and a slower deep thud there, that is why. The machine is running different sequences, asking the gradient coils to flex in different patterns, and each pattern has its own acoustic signature. It is, in a way, the machine's pulse sequence expressed as percussion. Each sequence has its own song. There are, it is worth mentioning, quieter ways. Engineers have developed techniques ramping the gradient currents more gradually rather than slamming them on and off, or using what are called zero echo time sequences that reduce the perceived noise substantially. Some modern machines can image with far less banging than the scanners of a decade ago. But standard sequences, the workhorses of clinical imaging, remain loud. The engineering of the quiet scan is real but gradual, and most scanners you are likely to encounter still fill the bore with that thunderous knocking rhythm, rising and falling, rising and falling, for as long as the sequence runs. And all through that noise, the machine is listening. Each time the gradient coils switch, they alter which frequencies the protons are emitting, and where in space those frequencies are coming from. The receiver coils, separate coils placed close to the body, tuned to pick up faint radio signals, are collecting the echoes. Not one echo, not a handful, hundreds of thousands of individual measurements, gathered line by line in a kind of mathematical space that engineers and physicists call K-space. The name sounds more mysterious than it is. K-space is simply the collecting grid, the raw data store where the measurements sit before they are processed. Each line in K-space corresponds to one readout, one burst of gradient switching and echo collection. And the raw data in K-space does not look like an image. If you were to display it directly, you would see something that looks vaguely like a starburst pattern, or a smeared constellation, bright at the center, fading toward the edges, meaning nothing obvious to the eye. The step that turns K-space into a picture is called the Fourier transform. It is a piece of mathematics developed in a different context by the French mathematician Joseph Fourier in the early 19th century, and its central insight is that any complex signal can be broken down into a sum of simple sine waves, each with its own frequency, amplitude, and phase. The Fourier transform takes the frequency domain data in K-space, all those overlapping humming notes, and converts it mathematically into a picture in real space. Spatial position, mapped from frequency. The image the radiologist reads on the screen was never a photograph. It was always a mathematical transformation of echoes. The machine assembled it from sound like radio signals, and mathematics turned those signals into the image of a knee, a brain, a spine. Now here is something that may surprise you, and it explains one of the things that makes MRIs so clinically powerful. Not all hydrogen protons are equally easy to tip or equally quick to recover. The time it takes a proton to relax back into alignment with the main field after the ARF pulse is called the T1 relaxation time, the longitudinal relaxation or spin lattice relaxation, because it involves the proton exchanging energy with its surrounding lattice of molecules. The time it takes the protons to lose their synchrony with each other, to stop precessing in step and drift into incoherence, is called the T2 relaxation time, the transverse relaxation, or spin-spin relaxation, because it is driven by interactions between neighboring spins. And crucially, different tissues have different T1 and T2 relaxation times. Fat has a short T1, meaning it snaps back into alignment quickly. Water and structures with a lot of free water has a long T1, meaning it takes its time. On a T2 weighted image, water is bright. On a T1 weighted image, fat is bright and water is darker. The way the machine exploits this is by changing its timing. There are two key timing parameters in any pulse sequence, called TR, repetition time, how long the machine waits before sending the next RF pulse, and T, echo time, how long it waits after the pulse before it listens for the echo. By choosing different combinations of TR and T, the radiologist can make the machine listen at different moments in the relaxation process. And at those different moments, different tissues will have recovered by different amounts. Fat will be bright at one timing and faded at another. Water will be the reverse. Muscle, cartilage, brain grey matter, brain white matter, each has its own characteristic T1 and T2 signature, and the machine can tune itself to separate them, to make any one of them bright while another is dim, simply by choosing when to listen. The machine is not changing anything inside you, it is only choosing which echo it pays attention to. And that is why tumours glow. Many tumours and areas of swelling, edema, the radiologists call it, and the plaques of multiple sclerosis and regions of inflammation all contain more free water than the surrounding healthy tissue. Water molecules, loosely bound and freely moving, have long T2 relaxation times. They hold their signal longer. So on a T2 weighted image, they appear bright against the darker background of normal tissue. A lesion that an X-ray would sail straight through because it's not dense enough, not bony enough, too similar in density to everything around it, lights up quietly and clearly on a T2 weighted scan because it is holding more water and the machine can hear that. There is a variant called FLARE, fluid attenuated inversion recovery, that takes this further. The normal fluid in the brain's ventricles is also very bright on T2 images, which can make it difficult to see lesions that sit right next to those fluid spaces. FLARE uses an additional inversion pulse to suppress the normal fluid signal so that the bright ventricles go dark and the bright lesions sitting beside them suddenly stand out clearly. It is a piece of sequence design that lets the machine selectively silence one bright signal while preserving another. And on the other end of the spectrum, bone is dark on MRI. So is air. Both contain very few mobile hydrogen protons. Bone's hydrogen is locked in a rigid crystal lattice, and air has almost none at all, and so they give back almost no signal. Which is, if you have only ever thought about medicine through the lens of the chest X-ray, precisely backwards from what you might expect. On an X-ray, bone is bright. On an MRI, bone is dark. The two machines are imaging entirely different properties of matter, and so they see the world in opposite contrast. X-ray and CT image density, how much the tissue stops the beam. MRI images hydrogen environments. Where X-ray finds bone and fails to distinguish the soft tissue crowded around it, MRI finds the soft tissue and barely sees the bone at all. And so the two machines divide the body between them like two friends who each see something the other quietly misses. CT is extraordinary at what it does. For bone fractures, for a head injury in an emergency room at 2 a.m, for the lungs and their subtle shadows, for a surgeon who needs to see exactly which rib is broken and at what angle, CT is fast, wide, and brilliant at density. It takes seconds, where an MRI takes minutes, and for those moments, speed matters more than almost anything else. But give Emery the soft, water-filled, chemically varied landscape of the living brain, and it becomes something else entirely. On an Emery, the grey matter of the cortex, the thin folded rind where you are, in some sense, thinking right now, and the white matter beneath it. The long insulated cables carrying signals between regions look different. Not because they are different densities, which they barely are, but because they hold hydrogen in subtly different environments, with subtly different relaxation times, and the machine is sensitive to that difference in a way that no X-ray ever could be. You can trace a nerve pathway. You can see a herniated disc pressing against the spinal cord. You can see the cartilage in a knee joint, the labrum in a shoulder, the meniscus, the ligaments, structures that on a plain X-ray are simply invisible, soft tissue in a world that only registered bone. The radiologist reading an MRI is reading a language that X-ray does not speak. Now, sometimes the radiologist looking at an Emery wants to see more. Wants to ask the machine a slightly different question, not just where is the tissue, but where is the blood flowing in unusual ways? Where has something broken through a barrier it was never meant to cross? And for that, there is gadolinium. Gadolinium is a metal, element 64 on the periodic table, and it is what chemists call paramagnetic, meaning it has unpaired electrons that respond to a magnetic field and, crucially, that shorten the T1 relaxation time of any water molecule in its immediate neighborhood. Pour a little gadolinium into a region of tissue, and that tissue suddenly brightens dramatically on T1-weighted images, as though someone turned a lamp on in a dark room, which makes it enormously useful. Tumours, for instance, often have blood vessels that are leaky in ways that normal vessels are not. The blood-brain barrier, which normally prevents large molecules from crossing from the blood into brain tissue, can be disrupted by a growing tumour, by inflammation, by certain infections. Gadolinium injected into the bloodstream will pass through a broken blood-brain barrier and concentrate in those regions, making them light up where they would otherwise be easy to miss. But free gadolinium, gadolinium by itself, dissolved in the blood, is toxic. So it is never used that way. Instead, it is bound to a carrier molecule, a process called chelation, which holds the gadolinium safely and allows the kidneys to filter the whole package out of the body over the hours following the scan. In patients with normal kidney function, this works cleanly and safely, and gadolinium contrast has been used for decades in millions of scans. Where caution is needed is in patients with severely reduced kidney function, where the contrast might linger too long. In those cases, older types of gadolinium agents, the ones with what chemists call a linear structure, where the gadolinium is held somewhat loosely, were linked to a rare but serious condition called nephrogenic systemic fibrosis, a thickening and hardening of the skin and connective tissues. Newer agents use what is called a macrocyclic structure, a cage-like carrier that holds the gadolinium more tightly. And these are now preferred, especially in patients with impaired kidneys. There are also ongoing discussions about small amounts of gadolinium that may remain in certain tissues, the brain, the bones, even after the kidneys have cleared the rest. The amounts are very small, and regulators, including the EFTA, have generally concluded that the benefits outweigh the risks when the agent is used appropriately. It is one of those places where medicine, as it always does, keeps looking, keeps asking, keeps refining what it knows. There is one more thing the machine can do that is worth drifting through slowly, because it is genuinely strange and beautiful. It can watch your brain think, not in any mystical sense, but in a deeply real one. The technique is called functional MRI or fMRI, and it rests on a signal first described by a scientist named Seiji Ogawa around 1990. The signal is called BOLD, blood oxygen level dependent. Here is the idea. When neurons in a region of your brain become active, when you move a finger or see a flash of light or hear a sound, that region calls for more blood, more oxygen, more fuel. The blood vessels nearby dilate and deliver it. And here is where physics enters quietly. Oxygenated hemoglobin and deoxygenated hemoglobin have different magnetic properties. Deoxygenated hemoglobin is paramagnetic. It slightly disturbs the local magnetic field in a way that oxygenated hemoglobin does not. So when fresh oxygenated blood floods a region of active brain, the local magnetic environment changes in a tiny, measurable way. The MRI can detect it. The scanner is not watching your neurons fire, it is watching the blood that follows them, with a delay of a few seconds between the firing and the detectable response. It is a shadow of thought, not thought itself. But it is a real shadow, cast by real activity, and it has transformed our understanding of which parts of the brain are involved in language, memory, fear, pleasure, pain, and 1,000 other things we barely had the vocabulary to study before. And all of this, every echo, every gradient switch, every slice of gadolinium-brightened tissue, every bold fluctuation, is accomplished without a single ionizing particle. No X-rays, no radioactive traces, no radiation of the kind that in high enough doses can damage DNA. The memory uses magnetism and radio waves. Radio waves, the same frequencies that carry music through the air. At intensities, the body absorbs as a little warmth, a gentle energy deposition the machine itself monitors and limits through what is called the SAR limit, the specific absorption rate. There is no accumulating radiation dose. A child can be scanned repeatedly. A pregnant patient can often be imaged with appropriate caution in ways that X-ray or CT would make more complicated. This is not a small thing. It is, in many ways, the quiet grace of the technology that you can look inside a living body with extraordinary detail and leave no mark in the atomic structure of what you have examined. But the machine is not without its dangers, and the main one is the magnet itself. You remember that the magnet is always on, not sometimes on, not on during the scan and off between patients, always on around the clock, year after year, whether anyone is in the room or not. That current has been circulating in those niobium-titanium coils since the day the scanner was ramped up, and it will circulate until the day someone deliberately quenches it. And a magnet of that strength will pull anything ferromagnetic, anything containing iron or steel, toward it with tremendous, sudden force. Not a gentle attraction. A pull that accelerates an object across a room in less time than it takes to think. In 2001, a 6-year-old boy named Michael Colombini was in an MRI room at a hospital in New York. Someone brought in a ferromagnetic oxygen cylinder. The magnet pulled it. It struck the boy while he was inside the bore, and he died of his injuries. It is the most cited MRI safety fatality in the history of the technology. And it was a turning point, a tragedy that sharpened how hospitals think about access, screening, and the physics of a room where a force that cannot be seen and cannot be switched off is always present. Today, MRI suites use what is called a 4-zone system. Zone 1 is the general public area, waiting rooms, corridors. Zone 2 is a controlled intermediate area where patients are screened. Zone 3 is the control room, restricted to trained personnel. Zone 4 is the magnet room itself, where only people who have been fully screened for metal enter, no ferromagnetic implants. No forgotten keys in a pocket, no steel-toed boots, no hairpins. It is not paranoia. It is the consequence of a quiet, permanent, enormous force sitting in the center of the room. And now, having drifted through all of this, through hydrogen and helium and gradient coils and gadolinium and blood flow and safe radio waves and a room that must be kept like a sanctuary, it feels right to pause and go back to the beginning, not to this conversation's beginning, but to the story's beginning. Back to 1938, when a physicist named Isidore Rabi aimed a beam of molecules through a magnetic field and noticed that at certain precise frequencies, the molecules absorbed radio energy in a way that told him something about their spin. He called it nuclear magnetic resonance, and it won him the Nobel Prize in Physics. Then in 1946, Felix Bloch and Edward Purcell independently discovered how to measure the same resonance in bulk matter, in liquids and solids, and they shared the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1952. For decades, chemists and physicists used NMR to study molecules. The idea of using it to image the inside of a living body seemed remote, almost fanciful. Then in 1971, a physician and researcher named Raymond Damadian published a paper showing that tumor tissue had different EMSTA relaxation times than healthy tissue. The T1 and T2 values were measurably different, which meant, in principle, that a scanner sensitive to those differences could distinguish cancer from normal tissue in a way that X-ray could not. He pursued the idea with extraordinary tenacity, building a whole body machine he named Indomitable, and on July 3, 1977, Raymond Damadian and his team produced the first MRI scan of a living human being, a scan of the chest of one of his graduate students, assembled painstakingly through hours of data collection. It was Paul Lauterbur in 1973 who contributed the piece that made imaging truly possible. The idea of using gradient magnetic fields to encode spatial position into the signal, so that each point in space precessed at a slightly different frequency and could be located within the image. And it was Peter Mansfield who worked out the mathematics and the fast imaging methods, including echo-planar imaging, that allowed scans to be assembled in practical time rather than over hours. In 2003, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine went to Lauterbur and Mansfield for their discoveries concerning magnetic resonance imaging. Damadian was not included. He was furious. He took out full-page advertisements in major newspapers, the shameful wrong that must be righted, they said, in large type, arguing that he had been robbed of recognition he deserved. The Nobel Committee said nothing. The prize cannot be given posthumously, and it cannot be appealed, and the door does not reopen. The argument about who deserves credit has never fully quieted. Science is made of people, and the history of people is rarely clean. And somewhere along the way, someone decided that the word nuclear, accurate, honest, referring only to the nucleus of the atom, was making patients afraid. Not of radiation, because there is none, but the word itself, in the years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Cold War's long shadow, carried a weight that the technology didn't deserve. So the name was shortened. Nuclear magnetic resonance imaging became magnetic resonance imaging. MRI, the physics did not change. The fear, at least a little, did, so here you are. Wherever you are tonight, in a quiet room, or on a train moving through the dark, or lying somewhere soft with a lamp still on, here is what that enormous, roaring, cold, silent machine is actually doing when you lie inside it. It is flooding you with a field so strong it would strip the keys from your pocket. It is listening to hydrogen, to the water in your blood and your cartilage and your cortex and your fat. It is sending a radio note tuned to the exact frequency at which those hydrogen atoms wobble, and it is waiting, in the brief silence after, for them to sing back. It is recording the echo of your own body. And from those echoes, from tens of thousands of tiny radio whispers given off by hydrogen atoms releasing the energy they briefly borrowed, it is writing a picture of you from the inside out, without a lens, without a beam, without leaving a trace. You are not being photographed inside that machine. You are being played. Your body is the instrument. Your hydrogen is the string. And the image the radiologist holds up to the light is written entirely in echoes. There is something in that worth carrying into sleep. That you are, right now, full of hydrogen atoms processing softly in the Earth's own quiet magnetic field. That every glass of water you have ever drunk is still in you, somewhere, in some form. That the same resonance principle that powers a machine the size of a small room has been there in your cells all along, humming at a frequency no one could hear until someone thought to ask the right question at exactly the right pitch. If you've enjoyed drifting through all of this, a gentle like or subscribe means a great deal. Small channels like this one genuinely rely on your support to keep going. And if you'd like to leave a note, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Sleep well, fellow voyager. The next journey keeps until you wake.